Can Sukuna strike the soul the same way that Yuji can? And if so, why didn't he use this against Gojo? Let's talk about it, but spoilers beware. Alright, first of all, shout out to Sil for inspiring this video, and his comment here was a bit too long to fit into a single screenshot, so essentially what Sil is saying here is that Yuji might be an even greater genius at Jujutsu than even Sukuna was, and he attributes that to Yuji's use of his soul perception in the way that Yuji's strikes attacked the soul. Because if Sukuna could do that, then why didn't he do it against Gojo? Because Sylv says that would have been a way for him to bypass the infinity and he wouldn't have needed Maharaga. So what's going on there? Okay, so I understand your logic and the conclusion that you reach to, but I disagree with one of the premises, which then throws everything off in my opinion. And that is that Sylv thinks that soul damage could bypass the infinity, and I do not believe that. So I do believe that Sukuna can strike the soul for the exact same reason that Yuji can. And we pretty much got hard confirmation of this when we saw that Sukuna healed his soul with RCT. The narrator told us that he had that ability thanks to sharing a body with Yuji. So the same way that Yuji can perceive and punch the soul when he wants to, Sukuna can do that very thing. But just having that does not mean you can just bypass the infinity. Now, a couple of things Sylv brings up is the fact that Yuji was able to imbue his slashes with soul-cutting damage, which is the way he helped to free Megami from Sukuna, but also Nobara, who is able to strike the soul, is able to do so from a long distance with her technique. So then it should follow that Sukuna could be able to imbue his slashes with soul damage and be able to hit Gojo with them from afar. But again, the premise here I disagree with is that soul damage just bypasses the infinity. First and foremost, in Nobara's case, she is doing soul damage from a long distance, but you gotta remember that she is striking a piece of her target short distance. Like she's using her hammer and her nail to like hit Sukuna's finger, for example, which then affected him in real life. So she's not just, doing it without any type of physical contact. And we know that Yuji specifically crafted a binding vow to be able to cut the soul with his dismantles that required him to touch the target. Now, theoretically, if somebody was skilled enough with Jujutsu, could they make a soul-cutting long-ranged slash? Yes, but that slash would still need to come in contact with the target. And if Gojo has his infinity up, whether or not the slash has soul damage on it is not going to help it bypass it. I do understand the idea there that something kind of as ambiguous as the soul might not operate by the same laws of physics, and so that would imbue the attack with the ability to bypass the limitless, but nothing in Jujutsu Kaisen has established that. And the fact that neither Yuji or Sukuna or Nobara has showcased that ability, they have all needed physical contact in all of the examples we've seen. I don't know why we would just assume that, because again, if it was true, then Sukuna should have just done that. Even Mahito, the godfather of the soul techniques, had the requirement of touching his target in order to manipulate them. So yeah, I think we just disagree on the premise that soul damage would bypass the limitless, because in a world where it doesn't, then it's not that Sukuna just didn't think of that or that he couldn't do it, it's just that it didn't have a useful application for him in his fight against Gojo. Which is why instead Sukuna's whole plan was to have Maharaga adapt to the infinity and give him a blueprint for how to do the same, and thus we got the world-cutting slash, or the existence slash, or the dimensional slash, something that was cutting space itself, so it cut everything within that space, including the limitless, including Gojo, and thus bypassing it. But all of that aside, to circle back to your original thesis here, that Yuji might be an even greater genius than Sukuna at Jujutsu, I still think there's room for that. I just wouldn't point to this specific soul thing as the primary evidence for it. But I certainly think there's a case that Yuji has kind of broken the mold and is going to expand on Jujutsu in ways that Sukuna could never even fathom of. But, what I will say, though, is that I think Sukuna was the pinnacle of, individual strength, throwing everything away in the pursuit of your own greatness, right? I don't think Yuji will surpass Sukuna in that realm for obvious reasons, but his genius with Jujutsu I think will take on other forms that may surpass Sukuna's in their own accomplishments, if that makes sense. And then while we're on this train, I also got sent in this fantastic write-up from Santo over in our Discord where he was discussing the difference between how Yuji and Sukuna used the shrine technique. And we talked about how the shrine technique is largely cooking themed, and a lot of people refer to Sukuna as Chef Sukuna, but obviously we saw that Yuji used the technique a little bit differently with the scissors and how he cuts, and we never got to see him use the furnace, but obviously his interpretation of it is different. So Santo's message dives into that and basically says that Sukuna would be the top chef, but Yuji would use it more like a food critic, basically saying that Sukuna sees everyone as a meal to be prepped, and Yuji sees everyone as a meal to be sampled, savored, and challenged. And I really love this, and I love when people get into their, deep interpretations of JJK. But honestly, I think I might see it in the complete opposite way, and I think that's awesome. Like, I think that really is the beauty of stories and analysis and interpretation, because we're all bringing our own perspective to these things. And I didn't even think about, like, the food critic angle, but honestly, I think I would apply that more to Sukuna, somebody who is kind of selfishly there to consume and critique, but not actually bring anything to the table. Now, this is nothing against critics and reviewers out there. I could somewhat be classified in that box, but so that's not what I mean, but just in the sense that, like, Sukuna isn't providing for anyone else, right? He is just taking wholeheartedly in the consumption. Whereas Yuji, I feel like I could paint more as a chef, somebody who is out there thinking of others and wanting to provide for them. And I was going to point out that Yuji, I wouldn't call him a chef by any means, but he did like to cook. And there was even a small plot point where he showed Megami how to make some meatballs that Megami then made for everyone else when they all thought Yuji was dead. It was kind of a way to, like, connect to him. And so I think that, Yuji could be the one out there, not necessarily going for his own consumption or his own challenge, as I think you put it, but the one out there trying to grab these things to then provide for others. But regardless of the specific interpretation, which I think there are no wrong answers here, I think you're absolutely right in terms of the reflection of that in their uses of the technique, which is why Yuji's shrine looked so different from Sukuna's. And I know that Santo said that he thought furnace might not even be a part of Yuji's. I still think that fire, in whatever form it may truly exist, because who knows what binding vows Sukuna placed on it to use it in the fire arrow form, I do think Yuji would have some version of it, and how he would use it would be extremely interesting. That was one of the things I was hoping we would get to see before JJK ended, but maybe this is something Gege would shed light on in a future interview or something. But yeah, I loved this. I actually put a whole video out on this, I think almost a year ago today. If I can find it, I'll throw it up here. But where I think I compared Sukuna as a butcher compared to Yuji's surgeon in the reflection of how they used the technique. So yeah, I loved this whole kind of dynamic that Gege was playing with at the end of the story. Anyways, y'all, that's going to do it for this one. Just a reminder that we got a few watch parties coming up this weekend. We're going to be watching the next 4 episodes of Attack on Titan, either tomorrow or on Saturday. Plus, we got a new episode of To Be Hero X, a new episode of Lazarus, and probably some other things I'm forgetting. So if you're not already in the Discord, come join us over there. And again, a huge shout out to both Sylv and Santo. Thank you guys for the support, and thank you guys for watching.